Retired farmer gives shelter to abandoned canine German Shepherd. During evacuation, then salvation happens. In the middle of a chaotic wildfire evacuation sweeping through rural Colorado, a retired farmer named Hank believed he had seen just about everything life could throw at him. After decades of hard labor on his land, Hank had weathered droughts, storms, and personal loss. But nothing prepared him for what he found that morning near the edge of his cornfield. There, trembling and covered in ash, stood a lone canine German Shepherd, his police collar still around his neck, but no handler in sight. The dog's fur was singed, his paws burned from hot ground, and his amber eyes reflected a mix of fear, exhaustion, and confusion. Most of the town had already evacuated. Hank should have been long gone too. But something deep inside him refused to leave this dog behind. What started as an act of kindness would soon become a story of redemption, survival, and a life-changing bond between a forgotten canining hero and a farmer who thought he had nothing left to give. Before we dive into this emotional and inspiring journey, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss more real-life stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances like this one. Hank Dawson had lived on the same piece of land for over 45 years. His hands were calloused from decades of tending soil, fixing fences, and raising livestock. But lately, the once thriving farm felt more like an empty shell. The crops had failed the previous year, his cattle had been sold off, and after his wife passed 2 winters ago, the house echoed with a loneliness that no amount of work could fill. Now, with the wildfire creeping closer to his property line, Hank stood at the back of his pickup truck, debating what to load next. The evacuation orders had come early that morning, and most of his neighbors had already packed up and left. Hank wasn't the kind of man who panicked easily, but even he could feel the heat in the air, smell the sharp tang of burning pine from miles away. The sky was already turning an eerie shade of orange. As he hauled a crate of tools toward the truck bed, a faint whimper caught his ear. He froze. Turning slowly, he scanned the edge of the cornfield near the old barn. At first, he thought it might be one of the stray dogs that sometimes roamed the area. But as he stepped closer, his heart caught in his throat. There, lying half-hidden beneath a tangle of dry brush, was a German Shepherd. Not just any shepherd. This one had a K9 police collar, the faded letters, K9 Unit, still visible under layers of soot and dirt. Hank dropped the crate instantly and hurried over. The dog's eyes fluttered open at the sound of footsteps, but he didn't move. His breathing was shallow, and when Hank reached out to touch him, the dog flinched but made no attempt to bite or run. "Hey there, boy," Hank murmured, kneeling beside him. "What the hell happened to you?" The dog's fur was matted with ash and grime. His paws were cracked and bleeding, likely from running across burning ground. There were scratches along his flank, and his ribs showed more than they should. Hank looked at the sky, then back at the dog. Every instinct told him to finish packing and get out of there. But something in the dog's eyes, something broken, yet pleading, made that impossible. "I can't leave you here," Hank said under his breath. With effort that surprised even himself, Hank lifted the shepherd into his own arms. The dog was heavier than he looked, but Hank cradled him like he'd once carried sacks of feed on his shoulder without blinking. He placed the dog gently in the passenger seat of his truck, laying an old blanket beneath him for comfort. The dog let out a low, exhausted groan, but didn't resist. As Hank slammed his door shut and climbed behind the wheel, the crackle of emergency radio stations filled the airwaves. Roads were closing fast. He had minutes, maybe less. "Hold on, buddy," Hank said, starting the engine and speeding down the dirt road, leaving a cloud of dust and falling ash behind. Driving with one hand, Hank grabbed his water bottle and poured some into a small metal bowl he kept in the truck for stray animals. At the first red light outside the evacuation zone, he offered it to the dog. To his surprise, the shepherd lifted his head weakly and drank. "That's a good sign," Hank muttered, giving a small relieved smile. As they reached the edge of the mountain, Hank realized he had no plan beyond getting out of danger. His home, gone. His belongings, left behind. And now, a wounded canine German shepherd sitting beside him, with no tag, no microchip, and no clue where he came from. Hank sighed heavily, glancing at the dog again. "Looks like you and me. We're stuck together now." The dog rested his head on Hank's knee, letting out one more tired breath. And for the first time in months, Hank didn't feel quite so alone. By the time Hank reached the evacuation shelter set up at the local high school gymnasium, the parking lot was already overflowing with families, pets, and frantic voices. Emergency lights from fire trucks and police vehicles painted the night in flickering shades of red and blue. Hank parked near the edge of the lot, cutting the engine. The German shepherd beside him hadn't moved much during the drive, except for a few shallow breaths and occasional tremors that rippled through his body. "You're holding on, buddy," Hank whispered, reaching over to gently stroke the dog's neck. The once bright canine collar hung loose against his thin frame. Stepping out of the truck, Hank walked around and opened the passenger door. The air smelled of smoke even here, miles from the advancing fire line. A young Red Cross volunteer spotted him almost immediately. "Sir, are you okay? Do you need medical attention?" she called, hurrying over. "I'm fine," Hank said, nodding toward the dog. But he's not. Her eyes widened when she saw the shepherd lying limp on the seat. "Oh no, is he?" "Alive, but barely," Hank answered. "Found him near my property line. Looks like he's been out there a while." "We have a vet team in the back lot," she said quickly. "They're working on rescued animals." Hank didn't wait for more instructions. He scooped the dog into his arms again, feeling the animal's ribs shift under his weight, and carried him across the lot toward a line of portable tents where veterinary volunteers operated under floodlights. A middle-aged woman in scrubs, her gray hair pulled back in a bun, waved Hank over as soon as she saw him. "Put him here," she instructed, pointing to a padded table. "What's his name?" Hank hesitated. "I don't know," he admitted, placing the shepherd down carefully. "Found him like this. Collar says K9 unit, but that's all I got." The woman nodded and began her examination, checking the dog's vitals, inspecting his paws and burns. "Dehydration, heat exhaustion, paw pad trauma, smoke inhalation," she rattled off, moving with practiced speed. "But he's a fighter. I've seen worse." Hank stood off to the side, watching in silence as they started IV fluids and cleaned the worst of the wounds. He crossed his arms over his chest, pretending the sting in his eyes came from the smoke in the air. After about an hour, the vet approached him with a clipboard. "We'll keep him here overnight," she said gently. "But he needs somewhere safe after that. We don't have enough space for long-term care." Hank rubbed the back of his neck, glancing back at the dog, who now lay curled under a silver thermal blanket. "I don't have much left," he said quietly. "Lost my house. My farm's probably gone too by now." The vet looked at him with soft eyes. "Sometimes," she said, placing a hand on his arm, "all it takes to save someone is giving them a chance." Hank swallowed hard, looking again at the shepherd. "I guess I can figure something out for him," he murmured. As dawn began to break, Hank sat on the gym floor with a borrowed blanket over his shoulders, sipping bad coffee from a paper cup. His mind drifted to memories of better times, of walking the farm at sunrise with his wife by his side, of hearing the sounds of cows lowing and chickens scratching at the dirt. Now, none of that remained. Except for one thing, a German shepherd with tired eyes, who had somehow survived against all odds, and who, for reasons Hank didn't fully understand yet, had chosen to stay alive long enough to cross paths with him. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the shelter windows, Hank made a silent promise to himself. If this dog was fighting to live, then Hank would fight right alongside him. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. 2 days later, after countless cups of bad coffee and restless nights on the shelter floor, Hank stood outside the veterinary tent, pacing. The morning sun had finally burned away the lingering haze of smoke, but a dull ache settled deep in his chest every time he thought about what he'd lost. His land, likely scorched. His home, probably reduced to rubble. But right now, all his concerns centered on the German Shepherd lying inside. The dog's condition had stabilized overnight. The IV fluids worked, the burns were healing, and the shallow breathing had become steady. Still weak, but alive. The vet approached, wiping her hands on a towel. "You've been here every day, every hour," she said softly. "He knows you're here, you know." Hank nodded, unable to find words. The vet offered a tired smile. "We've been calling him Ash because of the fire and, well, he was covered in it." Hank let the name sit on his tongue for a moment. "Ash," he repeated quietly. He turned toward the tent flap, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. Ash lay curled on a thick blanket, his head resting on his front paws. His eyes opened as Hank entered, and for the first time, there was recognition in them. A faint lift of his ears. Hank knelt beside him. "Hey, buddy," he said gently, reaching out to run a rough hand over the dog's head. Ash didn't flinch this time. In fact, he leaned into the touch with a soft, tired sigh. For a man like Hank, affection didn't come easy. But something about this dog, something about how hard he'd fought to stay alive, cracked open something inside him. "I guess it's you and me now," Hank murmured. The vet stepped in, holding a clipboard. "He's ready to be discharged today," she said. "He'll still need care. Antibiotics, clean dressing, small meals. But he's strong enough to leave." Hank looked up at her, surprised. "And go where?" he asked. She gave a knowing smile. "I was hoping you had an answer to that." Hank swallowed hard. He didn't have a home anymore, but his old truck still ran, and the RV parked at his brother's property a few miles north was empty and available. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. "I'll take him," Hank said. Later that afternoon, Hank lifted Ash carefully into the passenger seat of the truck. The dog settled in, resting his head on Hank's thigh as they drove. The highway stretched ahead, wide and empty. On either side, burnt trees stood like charred skeletons, reminders of how quickly life could change. Hank's phone buzzed. It was his brother, Charlie. "You're really bringing a dog?" Charlie said, half laughing through the speaker. "You can barely take care of yourself these days." Hank smirked. "Maybe that's exactly why I need him," he answered, giving Ash a gentle scratch behind the ears. When they arrived at Charlie's place, Ash tried to climb out of the truck on his own, but his legs buckled under his weight. Without hesitation, Hank scooped him up like he had the first day. "You're gonna get stronger," he whispered. "I'll make sure of it." Over the next few days, Hank settled into a new routine. Early morning walks, slow and short at first, followed by carefully prepared meals of soft, vet-approved food. Ash followed Hank's every move, never letting him out of sight. When Hank worked on small repairs around the RV, Ash lay nearby, his eyes tracking him constantly. At night, when the air turned cold, Hank found himself dragging a blanket off his own bed and laying it on the floor next to Ash's spot, just to make sure the dog stayed warm. Little by little, the weight in Hank's chest began to lift. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset, Hank glanced at the dog curled at his feet. "You're a tough one, Ash," he said softly. "Guess we both are." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Hank knew something for sure. This dog hadn't just survived the fire. He had saved Hank from his own. For the first time in months, Hank felt a strange sense of purpose each morning. Waking up, feeding Ash, going on short walks, they became little anchors in a life that had felt adrift for too long. Ash was healing fast. The burns on his paws were almost closed. His breathing was stronger, and there was a light in his eyes now. Hank couldn't help but smile every time Ash trotted across the yard with that slight limp tail wagging, ears perked like he belonged there. But just as life started settling into this fragile new rhythm, trouble came knocking. Literally. It was late afternoon when a white SUV pulled up to the dirt road outside Charlie's property. Two men stepped out, both dressed in plain suits, badges clipped to their belts. Hank stood on the porch, instinctively stepping between them and Ash, who sat at his feet, watching the strangers with quiet suspicion. One of the men, a tall guy with a crew cut and sunglasses, stepped forward. "Mr. Dawson." "That's me," Hank answered, folding his arms across his chest. The second man spoke next, flipping open a badge. "We're with the County K-9 Division. We've been looking for a missing police dog, German Shepherd, male, last assigned to Officer Mike Sandoval." Hank's stomach tightened. Ash lifted his head, ears flattening slightly as if he recognized the voices or sensed the tension in the air. "We tracked reports of a shepherd matching his description found near the evacuation zone," the man continued. "Your name came up through the vet clinic at the shelter." Hank clenched his jaw. "So now you come looking?" he said slowly. "Where were you when he was lying half dead in my truck?" The taller agent gave a sigh, lowering his sunglasses. "We were busy evacuating officers and civilians from the fire zone," he said. "Officer Sandoval went missing during that process. The dog, well, he disappeared at the same time." Hank's heart dropped. "So what? You're here to take him back?" The men exchanged glances. "That depends," the second one said. "We need to confirm it's him first. Mind if we check his microchip?" Hank hesitated but nodded. One of the men approached slowly, kneeling with a handheld scanner. Ash remained still, though his eyes never left Hank's face, as if waiting for a signal. The scanner beeped. The agent glanced at the screen, then stood. "Confirmed," he said. "K9 Unit Thor, badge number K9274, assigned to Officer Sandoval, missing in action." Hank swallowed hard, staring down at the dog. Thor. That was his real name. The agent stood straighter now. "We'll need to transport him back to headquarters for debrief and reassignment evaluation," the tall one said. Hank's fists tightened at his sides. "He's barely standing on his own," Hank growled. "You're telling me you want to throw him back into a kennel like he's some broken tool you lost?" One of the agents shifted uncomfortably. "We're just following protocol, sir." Hank took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "I won't stop you if it's what the law says," he said. "But you better make sure, wherever you take him next, that he doesn't go back to suffering." Before either man could answer, Ash or Thor took a step forward. Slowly, painfully, he limped over to Hank and sat down directly at his feet. The gesture was clear. He had chosen. For a long, heavy moment, no one moved. Finally, the shorter agent cleared his throat. "Given his condition," he said, glancing at his partner, "we'll report that the dog's recovery requires extended civilian care." The taller agent nodded reluctantly. "You'll need to sign temporary custody papers," he added. "But he can stay with you for now." Hank exhaled slowly, tension leaving his shoulders. "Good," he said, resting a hand on Ash's head. As the agents walked back to their SUV, Hank crouched beside the dog. "Thor, huh?" he whispered with a faint smile. "Well, Ash or Thor, you're home now, and I'm not letting you go." As the SUV disappeared down the road, Hank stood tall again, scratching behind Thor's ears. No matter what came next, they'd face it together. The following days brought a strange sense of normalcy to Hank's life. Thor, though Hank still slipped and called him Ash sometimes, was eating more, walking farther, and even starting to bark again when someone came too close to the property. Their bond grew stronger with every passing hour. Morning walks turned into longer strolls down the dirt road. Hank started bringing Thor along when he drove into town for supplies. And every night, after dinner, they sat together on the porch, both watching the sun sink below the Colorado hills in comfortable silence. But even as the routine settled, Hank could feel a storm brewing beneath the surface. One evening, just as Hank finished repairing the old wooden gate at the edge of the property, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. "Hello?" he answered, wiping sweat from his brow. "Mr. Dawson?" The voice on the other end was hesitant, but familiar somehow. "Speaking." "This is Officer Maria Ortega. I'm with the K9 division, and I was Officer Mike Sandoval's partner." Hank froze mid-step. I heard you've been caring for Thor," she continued, her voice softening. I needed to thank you." Hank swallowed hard. "I'm just doing what anyone would have done," he said, though he knew deep down that wasn't entirely true. There was a long pause. "I thought you should know. Officer Sandoval didn't make it out," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "He stayed behind during the evacuation to help clear a neighborhood that was cut off by the fire. His last call came through garbled, but dispatch believes he ordered Thor to run, to save himself." Hank's stomach twisted. "So, the dog? He survived because Sandoval told him to?" "Yes," Maria said. "Mike loved that dog like family. Losing him, it broke all of us at the station. When we heard Thor was alive and with you, it felt like getting a piece of Mike back." Hank looked down at Thor, who lay at his feet, his ears perked as if he sensed he was being talked about. "I want you to keep him," Maria said suddenly. "If that's what you want, Thor deserves to be with someone who won't give up on him again." Hank felt his throat tighten. "Are you sure?" he asked, surprised by the offer. "We'll make it official," she said. "I'll talk to the department. Mike would have wanted this." They said their goodbyes, and as Hank hung up, he sat on the porch step, staring out across the yard. Thor came over, nudging Hank's hand with his muzzle. Without thinking, Hank pulled him close, burying his face in the thick fur of his neck. "You're really staying, huh?" he whispered. "Guess that makes us family now." The next morning, Hank drove Thor to the vet for a full checkup. The staff at the clinic welcomed him like an old friend. The burns had healed nicely. The paw pads were scarred but strong. And most importantly, Thor's heart and lungs had recovered better than anyone expected. As they left the clinic, Hank noticed a bulletin board near the door. On it hung a faded photo of Officer Sandoval, standing proudly beside Thor during a training exercise, both smiling under the Colorado sun. For a long moment, Hank stood there staring at the picture. Something inside him shifted. When they got home that afternoon, Hank pulled out a hammer and some nails. By evening, a brand new wooden sign stood near the driveway entrance. It read, "Thor's Run, in honor of second chances." That night, as they sat again on the porch, Hank looked down at Thor, scratching behind his ears. "You saved yourself once," he murmured. "And I'm thinking, maybe you saved me too." As the cool night air settled around them and the stars emerged one by one in the dark sky, Hank realized something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. a second chance. Not just for Thor, but for both of them. The days that followed were filled with small victories, each one a reminder that both Hank and Thor were rebuilding their lives from the ashes, quite literally. Early each morning, Hank laced up his old work boots and grabbed Thor's leash. Though the dog rarely needed it anymore, they walked the back roads near Charlie's property, enjoying the cool air before the heat of the day settled in. Thor's limp was almost gone now. His gait was stronger, his tail held higher. Occasionally, when they passed an open field, Thor would break into a slow run, chasing after the scent of rabbits or just enjoying the freedom of open space. Hank watched him every time with a mixture of pride and heartache. "He's coming back to life," Charlie said one afternoon as he watched from the porch, sipping iced tea. "So am I," Hank answered softly, staring at the dog playing near the fence line. But healing didn't mean forgetting. One evening, while cleaning out the small shed behind the RV, Hank found a dusty box filled with old photos of his wife. Memories hit him hard. The farm, the laughter they once shared, the life that seemed so distant now. For a long time, he sat there on the shed floor, staring at a picture of her holding a stray dog they'd adopted years before. Thor must have sensed the change in Hank's mood, because moments later, the dog appeared at the doorway, tilting his head as if asking if Hank was okay. "Come here, boy," Hank said, patting the floor beside him. Thor walked over and laid down, resting his head on Hank's lap. The simple weight of the dog's head grounded him in ways nothing else had. "Funny how life works out," Hank murmured, running his fingers through Thor's thick fur. "I lost everything I thought mattered, and then you showed up." That night, as they sat together watching the stars, Hank noticed something unusual. Headlights. A car slowly crept up the long dirt road toward the RV. Hank stood, instantly alert. Thor followed suit, rising to his feet, body tense but silent. When the vehicle stopped, a woman stepped out. Officer Maria Ortega. Hank's heart skipped. She waved cautiously. "Didn't mean to startle you," she said as she approached. Hank met her halfway. "What brings you out here?" he asked. Maria smiled, holding up a small envelope. "Final paperwork," she said. "It's official now. Thor's yours." Hank exhaled, his shoulders dropping in relief. "Thank you," he said, genuinely. She crouched to pet Thor, who leaned into her touch with recognition, but stayed close to Hank's side. "I think he's right where he's meant to be," she said with a warm smile. They stood together for a moment, both looking at the dog, both understanding the silent bond that had formed. Before she left, Maria turned back toward Hank. "You saved him," she said. "And I think he saved you." Right back. After she drove off, Hank sat on the porch again, staring at the stars above, Thor at his feet. For the first time in years, he felt something settle inside his heart. Not emptiness, not loss, but peace. And as Thor let out a long, contented sigh, resting his head against Hank's boots, the old farmer smiled to himself. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. The next morning, Hank woke to something unfamiliar. The sound of Thor barking. Not a weak, fearful bark like in the first days, but a deep, confident, protective bark that echoed across the property. Hank jumped out of bed and rushed to the front door. Outside, Thor stood at the edge of the driveway, tail raised, ears alert, staring at a small group of people gathering near the fence line. It was a group of neighborhood kids from down the road, peering through the gate, holding soccer balls and backpacks. They'd heard stories about the big police dog living with the old farmer, and curiosity had gotten the better of them. Hank stepped outside, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Easy, boy," he said softly. Thor turned and looked at him, tail wagging but still standing guard between Hank and the kids. One of the boys, maybe 9 or 10 years old, stepped forward. "Is he really a police dog?" the boy asked, eyes wide with excitement. Hank chuckled. Was, he said. Now, he's just family. The kids laughed, and Thor, sensing the shift in energy, lowered his guard and trotted toward the gate, sniffing the outstretched hands and allowing a few careful pats on his head. It was a small moment, but for Hank, it felt monumental. Later that day, while stacking wood near the RV, Hank's phone rang again. This time, it was Officer Maria Ortega. "Hank, I wanted to tell you," she said, her tone lighter than before. "We're organizing a small ceremony next week for the K9 unit's loss during the fire. It's a way to honor Officer Sandoval and dogs like Thor who made it through." Hank paused, setting down a piece of firewood. "You think I should bring him?" he asked. "I think you both need to be there," she replied warmly. That night, Hank sat on the porch with Thor at his side, staring at the horizon. "Seems like you've still got work to do, buddy," he said, scratching behind the dog's ears. "And looks like I do too." The following week, Hank dressed in his best clean shirt and jeans. Thor wore a freshly polished collar with a new tag that read simply, "Thor Dawson." At the small outdoor ceremony, surrounded by police officers, firefighters, and families, Maria stood at the podium and spoke about Officer Sandoval's bravery and about Thor's survival. When Hank and Thor were called up, there was a long round of applause. Standing before the crowd, Hank cleared his throat, uncomfortable with so many eyes on him, but knowing he had to say something. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, keeping one hand on Thor's back. "But I can tell you this. Sometimes life takes everything you have, your home, your family, your hope, and then it hands you something you never expected." He looked down at Thor, voice thick with emotion. "This dog saved me, just by needing me, and I'm honored to spend the rest of his life making sure he knows he's home." The crowd erupted in cheers. Later, as the ceremony wrapped up, Maria pulled Hank aside. "We're setting up a community outreach program," she said. "Therapy visits for schools, hospitals, places where people need comfort. Thor would be perfect for it, if you're interested." Hank smiled, feeling something stir inside. A sense of purpose, of being needed again. "I think we're both up for the job," he said. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Hank sat on the porch with Thor pressed close against his side. For the first time in years, Hank didn't just feel like a man surviving the days. He felt like a man living them. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who believes in second chances and the incredible bond between humans and animals. Let's spread stories of hope, courage, and healing together.